So most people try to feel their way into who they are. They wait for this moment of clarity. They hope for this breakthrough. They try to align their behavior with some vague internal sense of authenticity. I did this when I pursued a career in academia. I really enjoyed it. But when I transitioned out of it, I had a severe crisis of identity and a severe crisis of competence. When I transitioned from academia into private business, private marketplace, taught myself how to code, got into software engineering, business consulting, I realized I had almost nothing to add other than an instinct and work ethic, which actually doesn't count for much and doesn't scale. And so I had to find new mental models and new systems that enabled me to upskill and to fortify my sense of self as somebody who could add value in a credible, legitimate way, in a way that was truly substantive, in a way that was rooted in actually adding value. And when I could learn to add value in a new way and put my ego aside and say, okay, I'm going to start as a beginner again, later than I'd like to in life, that's when things really started to click. And so I've tried this whole thing where you say, what do I want to do with my life? And then you go and you pursue that thing, right? For years, I just hoped that if I read the right book, if I had that right morning, if I found that right person, if I found that right career, that right idea, that right project, I'd finally become myself. But truth is, I was just debugging a self I never intentionally wrote. All of those instincts and desires and sense of direction that I had inherited, whether from my parents, whether from TV I was watching, whether from my friends. And at some point, I just stopped waiting. I started treating my identity the way that I would treat a software system I would design. And the thing is, I didn't really know how to do that until I learned how to write software. And anybody who knows how to write software knows that that's a lifelong journey of developing that skill. But here are some of the principles from learning to code and learning to do software development that had an immediate application as mental models to my sense of self and to my sense of identity. So the first one is that identity is not found, it's compiled. And what that means is when you're a kid, you inherit identity, kind of like a default installation. Your family, your religion, your expectations, trauma scripts, and you run the code that you're given. But when things start breaking, you realize this isn't me. This is just a system that I've been running. And you can keep patching. Oh, that's my alarm. You can keep patching this old code, hoping it runs better, or you can start designing your identity from first principles. And that doesn't mean inventing yourself out of thin air. It means taking the abstract values that you believe in and compiling them into behavior. So, because that's what identity is. Identity is not what you think, it's not what you believe, but identity is really what gets executed again and again under real world pressure. So, in that context, here are some truths that I've come across as far as what it means to compile that identity. The first one is that modular behavior equals a flexible identity. So in programming, you may write a script, or you may write a function, but you don't load every function into every file. You don't write a single huge, large piece of code, right, in a single text file, right? You import only what you need for the current context. And that's the same with identity. I don't have to be stoic, strategic, or insightful all the time. I just need to call the right modules when the right moment requires it. In the gym, I import intensity, or at least I try. In relationships, I import presence. In business, I import clarity and strategy. And the mistake is thinking you are the whole system all the time. You're not. You are the orchestrator of modules. You're the composer of functions. So when people feel fake, it's usually because they're trying to load everything, everywhere. And that's not authenticity. That's just poor personality architecture. So that's the first concept. Modular behavior equals a flexible identity, which enables more local versions of consistency. The second concept from software design that I feel has helped me understand how to rebuild my identity after it was eroded or devalued or required complete overhaul. And that is state management. So who am I under load? So in software, state is the current condition of the system. What's on, what's off, what's active. Same with you. So you don't rise to your potential under stress. You fall to your default state. So I define mine ahead of time, right? Presence over escape, action over shame, structure over chaos. Not because I always live it, because I 100% do not, but because I know how to reset it. So if I know my default state, when I'm malfunctioning, I can reset to that default state. So this is where I really started to, seeing in my relationships differently too. Not just how I act, but in how I respond. So we've got modular behavior equals flexible identity, state management, who am I under load? Number 3 is that relational identity runs on protocols. Now, the protocols is kind of a popular concept. Andrew Huberman talks about it a lot now, behavioral protocols. People are familiar with applying this concept of protocol to behavior design, but I'm applying it to identity design. So in technology, a protocol is a formal agreement. If I send this signal, you respond in this format. So we do this socially without realizing it, right? If I open up, you'll reject me. If I stay small, I stay safe. If I fix everything, then I'm worthy. These are protocols. These are automatic identity contracts that we run in the background. And most of them were written in childhood, never updated. So when you start changing, when you try to show up differently, you're not just breaking habits, you're breaking protocol. You're breaking identity primitives. And that's why change feels dangerous. Your nervous system is afraid that the handshake will fail. But here's the shift. You don't need anybody else's permission to write a new protocol. You just need the courage to send a new signal. And you hold your ground when the response breaks the old contract. Okay, so relational identity runs on protocols. Next, component reusability. Okay, this is where you get to systems of identity that scale. So I used to think that I needed different selves for different areas of life. And this made me feel like very pulled apart and distracted and diffused or decentralized as a person. I didn't like that, right? So I needed a gym self. I needed a work self. I needed a dating self and a spiritual self. And now I don't really think of it as all these split selves. You've got this Richard Schwartz internal family systems theory, where it's like you've got the core self and the manager self and the firefighter self and I don't love the semiotics of that. I don't love the ontology of saying each thing is a self. Now, from more of a software perspective, I think about component reusability. So I look for components. These are simple, powerful behaviors that scale across domains, right? So like just this morning, I did a 10-minute morning review. This equals mental clarity in business, peace in relationships, right? And it like the classic David Allen getting things done thing. Mind is for having ideas, not holding ideas. Boom, done. Now I have space, right? That's a modular habit. Saying no to distractions equals better sleep, better work. Structured weekly planning equals less shame, less feeling out of control, more momentum. So these aren't personality traits. They're compiled behaviors. They started as ideas, but through repetition, they became systems. And once they work, I reuse them. That's not rigidity. That's efficiency. So you've got modularity that scales. And then fifth, you've got environment is the runtime. So environment design is absolutely huge. So code doesn't run in a vacuum. This is often one of the most invisible parts of software design, the actual environment in which your code runs. It runs inside an environment, an operating system, a browser, a server. And you don't just choose who you are. You run yourself inside environments that either support or corrupt the identity that you're trying to build. So I don't just ask, who do I want to be? I ask, where does that version of me that I want to be run smoothly? Where does that version of me run smoothly? For me, my office here equals clarity. The gym equals agency. Nature equals nervous system regulation. My Notion system, my project management and personal project management system equals memory and structure and peace. So I design my environments to reduce friction between who I am and my ideal self. And I make the identity I want feel like the most natural outcome based on that environment design. 6, this is very difficult because it requires you to zoom out and think long-term about your behavior design. And this is one of the most difficult actions to perform in behavior design is long-term behavior design. But quarterly refactors. So this is where you're actually versioning yourself. So every few months, I sit down and I ask, what parts of me are throwing errors? What behavior patterns feel outdated? What scripts am I still running from a previous version of me that no longer apply? And this is not about shame. It's not about looking at me and doing some self-deprecating exercise. It's about maintenance. It's about updating. Refactoring in code means improving the structure without changing what the system actually does. It's the same with identity. I don't erase myself every few months. I clean up the logic. So I'm not running Paul version 25.4 anymore. I'm running Paul version 35.7. The environment's changed. The dependencies have shifted. My external world has been modified. The architecture of the self needs to reflect that. To the degree that I want to exhibit and act from a designed self, I must commit maintenance changes and updates that reflect the updates of my external world, as well as the need to grow internally. So all this to say, I don't do this because I feel like I'm perfect or this is like the best way to do it or the ideal system. Like I said, I've messed up a lot and I've pursued the wrong paths in life many, many times. And when I moved into software development, I found a mental model that really clicked with me and helped me to actually implement behaviors in my life that made sense, that gave me a rationale for why I would do certain things a certain way. So I do this really because I'm flawed and because I feel by nature emotional and reactive, still working through stuff that's lived honestly in my system for decades. But I don't want to be ruled by accidentality. I build slowly, sometimes very sloppily, sometimes very systematically. Not a fantasy self, a functional self that functions to meet my needs. One that holds under load, one that I can trust when I don't feel like myself. So if you're anything like me, you're in any kind of situation like I've been in, you don't need to find who you are. You need to compile the self you want into repeatable action and run it in an environment that reinforces it. And when the code breaks, you refactor, you rerun, you recommit, because the version of you that's worth building. It's not perfect, but it does work. The version of you that's worth building isn't perfect, but it does work.